The silence in Harlem was the first warning. In a neighborhood that usually thrummed with the rhythm of jazz, the roar of engines, and the constant hustle of the street, silence was not a sign of peace. It was a sign of a holding breath, a precursor to a storm. Bumpy Johnson stood by the window of his penthouse at the Lenox Terrace, looking down at the avenues that served as the veins of his empire. For 3 days, the ecosystem had been off balance. The usual flow of money and information had stuttered, and the source of the disruption was a void where a loud man used to be. Frank Lucas had gone quiet. Frank was not a quiet man. He was flash and thunder, a man who wore chinchilla coats to boxing matches and drove cars that cost more than most brownstones. He moved with an arrogance that Bumpy found distasteful, yet tolerating him had been a necessary chess move in the changing landscape of the city. But for 72 hours, Frank's corner boys had been aimless, his collectors absent, and his usually boisterous presence at the local clubs non-existent. The streets were whispering that the police were closing in, that a major indictment was coming down, and that Frank had fled the city to avoid the heat. "Zip," Bumpy said without turning away from the window. His voice was a low rumble, steady and unyielding, like the stone foundation of the building. Zip was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looked up, his face etched with the same concern that Bumpy felt. "Yeah, Bumpy?" "Get the car," Bumpy said. "We're going to pay a visit to Frank's place." Zip frowned, setting the cup down. "The police are crawling all over his operations, Bumpy. If he's gone to ground, he's probably halfway to Vegas by now. Going to his house, that's inviting trouble." "Frank is careless," Bumpy replied, turning to face his lieutenant. "He leaves messes, and when he leaves a mess, it's my neighborhood that smells the rot. I need to know if he's run for good or if he's planning something stupid. And I can't trust the rumors. I need to see it with my own eyes." Bumpy didn't fear the police. He feared chaos. And a leaderless crew like Frank's was a recipe for chaos. The drive to Frank's townhouse on 118th Street was short. The car moved smoothly through the afternoon traffic, a black shark swimming through a sea of lesser fish. When they arrived, the street was surprisingly empty. There were no patrol cars, no federal agents kicking down doors. It was just quiet. The townhouse, a symbol of Frank's rapid ascent and gaudy taste, stood dark and imposing. The curtains were drawn tight, sealing the secrets inside. Bumpy stepped out of the car, buttoning his suit jacket. He moved with a grace that belied his age and his reputation as a ruthless enforcer. Zip and 2 other men, massive figures who served as Bumpy's muscle, flanked him. They walked up the stone steps, the sound of their leather shoes sharp against the pavement. Zip tried the front door. It was locked, but not bolstered. He pulled a small set of tools from his pocket, and within seconds, the lock clicked open with a soft, metallic surrender. They stepped inside. The air in the house was stale, carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne and old cigar smoke, underneath which lay a mustier, sharper smell that Bumpy couldn't quite place. The interior was exactly as Bumpy expected: ostentatious. Velvet furniture, gold-leafed frames, crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen tears. It was the home of a man trying desperately to prove he was a king, rather than a man who simply was one. "Check the upstairs," Bumpy ordered the 2 muscle men. "See if he left any papers, cash, anything that tells us where he went." The men nodded and moved silently up the grand staircase. Bumpy and Zip remained on the ground floor, moving through the living room and the kitchen. There were signs of a hasty departure. A half-eaten meal sat congealed on the dining table. A drawer was left open, emptied of its contents. He ran scared, Zip muttered, looking at the mess. Probably grabbed the cash and the jewelry and bolted. Bumpy nodded slowly, but his instincts were screaming at him. Frank ran, yes, but why? The police pressure was standard for men in their line of work. Frank had weathered heat before. This felt different. It felt desperate. Bumpy walked toward the back of the house, near the kitchen pantry. That strange smell was stronger here. It wasn't just stale air. It was the smell of damp earth and neglect. He stopped near a heavy oak door that led to the basement. "Zip," Bumpy said softly. "You hear that?" Zip paused, tilting his head. The house was silent. "I don't hear nothing, Bumpy." "Exactly," Bumpy said. "A house this big, with the heat off. There should be settling noises, pipes knocking. It's too quiet." Then a sound broke the silence. It was faint, barely a scratch against the air. A whimper. Bumpy's eyes narrowed. It came from behind the basement door. He reached out and tried the handle. Locked. Unlike the front door, this one had a heavy padlock hasp screwed into the wood, a crude addition that looked out of place in the expensive hallway. "Break it," Bumpy commanded. Zip didn't hesitate. He signaled for one of the larger men who had just come back downstairs. The man approached the door, braced himself, and delivered a punishing kick near the lock. The wood splintered. A second kick tore the screws from the frame, and the door swung open, banging against the inner wall. A draft of cold, foul air rushed up from the darkness. It smelled of mold, unwashed bodies, and fear. Bumpy pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to his nose, peering down into the abyss. There was no light below. "Flashlight," he ordered. Zip handed him a heavy torch. Bumpy clicked it on, the beam cutting through the gloom as he descended the wooden stairs. The wood creaked under his weight, announcing his arrival to whatever lay beneath. The basement was a stark contrast to the palace above. It was unfinished, with a dirt floor and stone walls that wept moisture. Old furniture was piled in corners, covered in white sheets like ghosts. Bumpy swept the light across the room, the beam catching dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. The beam stopped in the far corner. Bumpy's breath hitched in his throat. Huddled against the cold stone wall, chained to a thick iron pipe, was a small figure. At first, Bumpy thought it was a doll or a pile of discarded rags. But then the rags moved. Two terrified eyes, wide and glistening in the harsh light of the torch, looked up at him. It was a girl, a little white girl, no older than 10. She was filthy. Her dress, which looked like it had once been an expensive Sunday frock, was torn and stained with dirt and grime. Her hair was matted, and there was a dark, ugly bruise blooming on her cheekbone. She was shivering violently, her small body convulsing with cold and terror. A heavy industrial chain was wrapped around her ankle, the other end padlocked to the plumbing. For a moment, Bumpy Johnson, the man who had faced down hitmen and mob bosses without blinking, felt his heart stop. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through him, followed immediately by a wave of profound sorrow. He moved. "It's okay," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a gentle, soothing register that few people ever heard. "It's okay, little one." He crossed the dirt floor in 3 long strides. The girl flinched as he approached, pressing herself harder against the cold stones, hiding her face in her knees. She expected pain. She expected the monster who had put her there. Bumpy knelt in the dirt, ruining his tailored trousers without a second thought. He placed the flashlight on a crate, aiming it at the ceiling so the light would diffuse and not blind her. He quickly shrugged off his suit jacket, expensive Italian wool, and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. The jacket engulfed her small frame, smelling of tobacco and safety. "I'm not going to hurt you," Bumpy whispered, his hands hovering near her but not touching, giving her space. "My name is Ellsworth, but my friends call me Bumpy. I'm going to get you out of here." The girl looked at him, her eyes darting to Zip and the other men standing at the bottom of the stairs, their faces masks of shock and disgust. She didn't speak. Her lips were cracked and dry, trembling too much to form words. Bumpy looked back at Zip. The look on Bumpy's face was terrifying. It promised violence. It promised a reckoning. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled. "Get something to cut this chain. Now," Zip nodded, his jaw tight. "I saw a boiler room through the other door. There's gotta be tools." He turned and disappeared into the shadows. Bumpy turned his attention back to the girl. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second, clean handkerchief. Gently, slowly, he reached out to wipe a smudge of dirt from her forehead. She flinched again, squeezing her eyes shut. Bumpy paused, letting his hand rest in the air until she opened her eyes. Then, with the tenderness of a grandfather, he wiped her face. "You're safe," he murmured. "Nobody is ever going to hurt you again. I promise you that." The girl stared at him, confused. This man was large and scary, like the other one, but his eyes were sad. He was warm, and he had given her his coat. Zip returned moments later with a pair of heavy red bolt cutters. He handed them to the biggest of the enforcers. "Cut it," Zip said. "Careful." The enforcer knelt, positioning the jaws of the cutter around the chain link nearest the girl's ankle. "Turn your head, sweetheart," the big man said softly. "This is going to make a loud noise." The girl buried her face in Bumpy's coat. The enforcer strained, the muscles in his neck popping, until, snap, the metal gave way. The chain fell to the dirt with a dull thud. Bumpy didn't wait. He scooped the girl up into his arms. She was light, far too light, frail from days of hunger. She stiffened for a second, then collapsed against his chest, clutching the lapels of his jacket with white-knuckled desperation. "Let's go," Bumpy said, standing up. "We're leaving this place." He carried her up the stairs, out of the darkness and into the dim light of the hallway. He didn't stop to look at Frank's furniture or his paintings. He walked straight out the front door, into the fresh air. "Zip, drive," Bumpy ordered. "We're going home. Use the car radio. Call Mamie. Tell her to get a bath running and to have food ready. Tell her we're bringing a guest." As the car pulled away from the curb, Bumpy held the girl close, shielding her from the window so no one on the street could see her. She had fallen into a sort of stunned silence, her breathing hitching every few seconds. Bumpy looked down at the top of her head, his mind racing. Why? Why would Frank Lucas do this? Frank was a gangster, yes. He was ruthless, yes. But he was a businessman. Kidnapping a child wasn't business. It was insanity. It was a violation of the highest order. In the life, there were rules. You killed men who crossed you. You stole from thieves. But you never, ever touched the women and children. They were off limits. They were the line that separated them from animals. Frank had crossed the line. And now Bumpy knew. Frank had to be put down. The drive to the Lenox Terrace was tense. Bumpy didn't speak to his men. He just hummed a low, tuneless melody, rocking the girl slightly to keep her calm. When they arrived, he carried her through the service entrance to avoid the doorman and took the private elevator up to the penthouse. The elevator doors opened directly into the foyer. Mamie was waiting. She was wearing a housecoat, her hair tied back, her face etched with worry after Zip's cryptic call. "Ellsworth, what is going on?" she began, but the words died in her throat when she saw the bundle in his arms. Bumpy stepped into the light. "Mamie, take her," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Mamie rushed forward. She saw the oversized suit jacket, the matted hair, the bruised face of the terrified little girl. Her maternal instincts took over instantly. She didn't ask who the girl was or where she came from. She saw a child in need. "Oh, my poor baby," Mamie cooed, reaching out. "Come here. Come to Mamie." Bumpy gently passed the girl to his wife. The girl hesitated, clinging to Bumpy's shirt for a second, but Mamie's soft hands and warm presence were irresistible. Mamie pulled the girl into her embrace, shushing her gently. "She's been in a basement," Bumpy said quietly. "Frank's basement. She's cold, Mamie, and she's hungry." "I've got her," Mamie said firmly, her eyes flashing with a mixture of compassion and anger at whoever had done this. "I've got warm water and soup. Zip, bring those towels from the closet." Mamie carried the girl toward the bathroom, murmuring words of comfort. "We're going to get you cleaned up, sugar. We're going to get you nice and warm and find you some pretty clothes. You don't have to be scared anymore." Bumpy watched them disappear down the hall. As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut, the tenderness vanished from Bumpy's face, replaced by a cold, hard mask of fury. He walked to the living room and poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back his rage. Zip walked in, looking grim. He was holding a folded newspaper and a piece of paper with some notes scribbled on it. "Bumpy," Zip said, "the boys made some calls. We figured out who she is." Bumpy turned, his eyes dark. "Tell me." "Her name is Emily," Zip said. "Emily Harrison." Bumpy stared at him. The name sounded familiar, but he waited for the rest. "She's the daughter of Judge Harrison," Zip continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The federal judge downtown, the one heading up the new organized crime task force." The glass in Bumpy's hand shattered. He didn't throw it. He just squeezed it until it exploded. Water and shards of glass fell to the thick carpet, mixed with drops of blood from his palm. But Bumpy didn't seem to notice the pain. "Harrison!" Bumpy hissed. It all made sense now. The silence, the police presence, but the lack of raids on the money spots. Frank hadn't just kidnapped a random child. He had kidnapped the daughter of a federal judge. He had taken her as leverage. He was trying to bargain with the law, using a 10-year-old girl as a chip. It was the stupidest, most dangerous thing Bumpy had ever heard of. Frank had effectively painted a target on the back of every black man in Harlem. If the judge thought the Harlem mobs had his daughter, he wouldn't stop until he burned the entire neighborhood to ash. He wouldn't care if it was Frank or Bumpy or the man selling hot dogs on the corner. "He did this to cut a deal," Bumpy said, his voice trembling with lethal intensity. "He snatched a child to save his own skin." "The word is, Frank tried to negotiate," Zip explained rapidly. "Sent a message to the judge saying the girl gets returned when the indictments against him disappear. But then the heat got too hot too fast. The cops were closing in on his house faster than he thought. So he ran and left her there," Bumpy finished. "He left her chained to a pipe like a dog, while he saved himself." Bumpy grabbed a towel from the bar and wrapped his bleeding hand. "Where is he, Zip?" "We tracked the car," Zip said. "He didn't go to the airport. He went north, He's got a second property, a farmhouse up in Yonkers, a stash house he bought under a cousin's name. We think he's hiding there, waiting for the heat to die down so he can come back and move the girl." "He isn't coming back," Bumpy said. Bumpy walked over to the hallway. He could hear the water running in the bathroom. He could hear Mamie singing a soft gospel song. He could hear the faint splash of water as the little girl was bathed. The contrast between the domestic safety of his home and the brutality of what Frank had done made his blood boil. He walked back to Zip. "Get the men," Bumpy commanded. "All of them. We're going to Yonkers." "Bumpy," Zip said cautiously, "we need to get this girl to the police. If we go up there and we're holding her—" "We can't take her in yet," Bumpy snapped. "If Frank gets wind that she's free, he disappears for good. Or worse, he tries to pin this on us before we can clear our names. I have to deal with Frank first. I have to make sure he can't run." Bumpy tightened his tie. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. He didn't see a gangster. He saw a man who had been forced to clean up the mess of a child pretending to be a king. "Zip," Bumpy added, his voice colder than the basement had been. "Frank thinks he's hiding. He thinks he's smart. But he forgot the one thing that matters in this life." "What's that, Bumpy?" "You never involve the innocent." Bumpy checked his watch. It was evening. "We leave in 10 minutes. I need to speak to Mamie first." He walked down the hall and knocked softly on the bathroom door. Mamie opened it a crack. Steam billowed out, smelling of lavender soap. "How is she?" Bumpy asked. "She's quiet," Mamie whispered, "but she's safe. I threw those rags away. I'm going to put her in one of my oversized t-shirts for now. She's eating some crackers." "Good," Bumpy said. "Keep her here. Keep the curtains drawn. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Zip. I have to go handle the man who did this." Mamie looked at him, seeing the darkness in his eyes. She knew that look. It was the look of a man going to war. "Where are you going, Ellsworth?" she asked. "Yonkers," Bumpy said. "To fix this." Mamie reached out and touched his cheek. "That little girl. She's broken, Ellsworth. Whoever did this—" "I know," Bumpy said. "I know." He turned and walked away before she could see the violence in his eyes. He couldn't let Mamie see what he was about to do. She was the light in his world, and he had to keep his darkness separate. Bumpy returned to the living room. Zip and the other enforcers were checking their weapons. Bumpy waved his hand. "No guns," Bumpy said. The men looked at him in surprise. Frank Lucas would surely be armed. His guards would be armed. Going in without heat was suicide. "Bumpy?" Zip asked. "I said no guns," Bumpy repeated. "Frank isn't going to die tonight. Death is too easy. I want him to learn. I want him to understand exactly what he did. And for that, I need my hands." Zip nodded slowly, understanding. He put his pistol back in the drawer. He motioned for the others to do the same. "Let's go," Bumpy said. They walked out of the penthouse, leaving the warmth and the light behind, stepping back into the shadows of the city. The ride to Yonkers would take an hour for Bumpy to think about the little girl in the basement, an hour to think about the chain, an hour to let his rage harden into a diamond-sharp point. As the Cadillac merged onto the highway, leaving the lights of Harlem in the rearview mirror, Bumpy Johnson looked out the dark road ahead. Frank Lucas had wanted to be a boss. He had wanted the power and the glory. But tonight, Frank was going to learn that being a boss wasn't about the money or the coats. It was about the code. And tonight, the code was coming to collect. The drive to Yonkers was a journey into a different world. As the Cadillac left the concrete canyons of Harlem and the lights of the city faded into the rearview mirror, the landscape shifted to dark, rolling hills and trees that clawed at the night sky like skeletal fingers. The air here was cleaner, thinner, but to Bumpy Johnson, it smelled of isolation. It was the kind of place men went when they wanted to be forgotten, or when they wanted to bury their sins. Bumpy sat in the back seat, his hands resting on his knees, his posture rigid. Beside him, Zip watched the road, the headlights cutting a cone of illumination through the darkness. The silence in the car was heavy, filled with the unspoken violence that was about to be unleashed. Bumpy was not a man who enjoyed hurting people. He viewed violence as a tool, a necessary mechanic of his trade. But tonight, the rage that burned in his chest was personal. It was a cold blue flame fueled by the image of a terrified 10-year-old girl chained to a rusted pipe in a damp basement. "The turnoff is up ahead," Zip said quietly, breaking the silence. "Dirt road. Leads to a farmhouse set back about half a mile from the main drag. It's secluded." "Perfect," Bumpy said. Frank picked a good spot to hide. A good spot to be a coward. The car crunched onto the gravel, the tires popping on the loose stones. The farmhouse appeared through the trees, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint that looked gray in the moonlight. There was a single light burning in a downstairs window, a beacon in the void. A sleek Jaguar was parked out front, looking ridiculously out of place against the rotting wood of the porch. It was Frank's car. Even in hiding, Frank Lucas couldn't help but advertise his presence. He was careless to the end. "Park here," Bumpy ordered. We walked the rest of the way. They exited the car, the cool night air biting at their faces. Bumpy adjusted his cufflinks, a habit from a lifetime of maintaining his appearance, even in the face of chaos. He signaled to the 2 enforcers who had accompanied them. "Watch the back. If he tries to run, break his legs, but don't kill him." The men nodded and melted into the shadows, circling the house. Bumpy and Zip walked straight up the driveway. They didn't sneak. They didn't crouch. They approached with the inevitability of a coming storm. They reached the porch. Bumpy could hear music coming from inside, jazz, loud and chaotic, something Frank probably thought made him look sophisticated. Bumpy stepped up to the door. He didn't knock. He raised his leg and drove his heel into the wood just below the lock. The door didn't just open. It exploded inward, the frame splintering with a sound like a gunshot. Bumpy stepped into the foyer, Zip right behind him. The room was sparse, furnished with cheap chairs and a table covered in empty takeout containers and bottles of expensive cognac. Frank Lucas was sitting on a sofa, a glass in his hand, his feet propped up on a crate. He jumped up, spilling the amber liquid all over his silk shirt, his eyes wide with shock. 2 of his bodyguards, who had been dozing in chairs in the corner, scrambled for their weapons. "Don't!" Zip barked, leveling a gaze at them that was more dangerous than any gun. "You reach for those pieces, and you don't leave this room." The guards froze. They looked at Bumpy Johnson, the legend, the king of Harlem, standing in the doorway like the Grim Reaper in a tailored suit. They looked at Frank, who was trembling, wiping liquor off his chest. They slowly raised their hands. They knew who signed the real checks in the city. "Get out," Bumpy said to the guards. He didn't look at them. His eyes were locked on Frank. The guards didn't hesitate. They abandoned their post and their boss, slipping out the front door and disappearing into the night. Loyalty was a commodity Frank Lucas had bought, not earned, and tonight The funds had run dry. "Bumpy," Frank stammered, backing away until his legs hit the sofa. He tried to compose himself, tried to summon that smooth, charming persona that had charmed half of Harlem, but it cracked under the weight of Bumpy's stare. "Bumpy, listen. You shouldn't be here. The feds..." "The feds are in Harlem," Bumpy said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He took a step forward. "They are tearing my neighborhood apart. They are kicking down doors. They are terrifying mothers and grandmothers. And do you know why, Frank?" I had to do it," Frank said, his voice rising in pitch. He held his hands up, palms out. "It was a power move, Bumpy. You always talk about leverage. You always talk about holding the cards. Judge Harrison was going to ruin us. He was going to sign those indictments. I took his girl to make him pause, to make him deal." "You took a child," Bumpy said, taking another step. "I didn't hurt her," Frank protested, though the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew the condition she was in. I had to keep her secure, and then the police started getting close to the brownstone. I couldn't get caught with her there, Bumpy. If they found me with her, it's life without parole, maybe the chair. I had to move. I came up here to let the heat die down, so I could figure out how to move her safely." "You left her," Bumpy said. He was close now, close enough to smell the fear and the cognac on Frank. "You chained a 10-year-old girl to a pipe in a dark basement, without food, without water, and you ran away to a farmhouse to drink expensive liquor and hide." "I was protecting the business," Frank yelled, trying to find some scrap of courage. "I did it for us, for the power. You're too old, Bumpy. You don't see how the game is played anymore. You have to be ruthless." The slap came out of nowhere. It wasn't a punch. A punch was a fight. This was a correction. Bumpy's open hand connected with the side of Frank's face, with a sound that echoed through the empty house like a thunderclap. The force of the blow spun Frank around, his legs tangling in the rug, and he crashed to the floor, knocking over the table of bottles. Frank lay there for a second, stunned, his hand cupping his cheek, blood trickling from a split lip. He looked up at Bumpy with pure shock. No one had touched Frank Lucas like that in years. Bumpy didn't stop. He reached down, grabbing Frank by the lapels of his chinchilla-lined jacket. With a strength that defied his years, Bumpy hauled Frank to his feet, lifting him until Frank's toes were barely scraping the floorboards. Bumpy pulled him close, face to face, eye to eye. "What is my number one rule?" Bumpy roared. The sound was primal. It wasn't the voice of a businessman. It was the voice of the street, the voice of every hard lesson learned on the pavement. Frank stuttered, his eyes darting around, terrified. I... Bumpy shook him, his knuckles white. "Say it!" No women," Frank gasped, tears of pain and humiliation welling in his eyes. "No children." "Never!" Bumpy shouted, shoving Frank backward. Frank stumbled and fell back onto the sofa, cowering. "Never involve women and children in the business between men. That is the wall, Frank. That is the only thing standing between us and the animals. We are criminals, yes. We kill, yes. But we do not touch the innocent. When you cross that line, you invite the devil into your house. You invite the kind of heat that doesn't stop until everyone is dead." Bumpy stood over him, straightening his jacket, his breathing heavy. "You wanted to be a king," Bumpy spat, "but you act like a peasant. A king protects his people. A king takes the heat. You used a little girl as a shield because you were scared of a judge." Frank wiped the blood from his mouth, looking at the floor. "What are you going to do? Are you going to kill me?" Bumpy looked at him with disgust. Killing you would be a mercy. And right now, I don't feel merciful. I feel like letting you live with the shame of what you are. Bumpy pointed a finger at him. You are going to stay in this house. You are not going to leave. You are not going to make a phone call. You are going to sit here in the dark and pray that I can fix the mess you made. Give me 3 days. And after 3 days? Frank asked, his voice trembling. If I fix this, Bumpy said, you come back to Harlem and you fall in line. You learn your place. But if that little girl doesn't make it home safe, or if the police connect this to me because of your stupidity, I will come back here. And the next time I open that door, I won't be using my hand. Bumpy turned on his heel. Zip, we're done here. They walked out of the house, leaving Frank Lucas sitting in the ruins of his ego, bleeding and alone in the dark. Bumpy didn't look back. He had wasted enough time on trash. Now he had to do the hard part. He had to save a life. Back at the Lenox Terrace, the atmosphere was entirely different. The penthouse, usually a place of quiet luxury, had been transformed into a sanctuary. Mamie Johnson moved through the rooms with a quiet, focused energy. She had drawn all the blinds, dimming the lights to a soft, warm glow to soothe the frightened child. In the guest bedroom, Emily Harrison sat on the edge of the bed. She had been bathed, the grime of the basement scrubbed away to reveal pale, freckled skin. She was wearing one of Mamie's silk t-shirts, which hung on her like a dress, and a pair of thick wool socks. Her hair, though still damp, had been gently combed out. She was eating soup from a spoon that Mamie held to her lips. Every movement the girl made was skittish, like a wounded bird expecting a predator. "That's it, sugar," Mamie cooed, her voice a warm melody. "Just a little more. You need your strength." The front door opened. Mamie stiffened, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. Emily froze, her eyes widening in terror. "It's just Ellsworth," Mamie whispered. "It's the man who found you, remember? He gave you his coat." Bumpy walked into the room. He had shed the aura of violence he wore in Yonkers. He had left the rage outside the door. He walked slowly, his hands visible, his face soft. "Hello, Emily," Bumpy said gently. The girl looked at him. She remembered him. He was the giant who had come into the dark place. He was the one who had been angry at the bad man, but gentle with her. "Hi," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken. Bumpy smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "You look much better. Mamie taking good care of you?" Emily nodded. "She made soup." "Mamie makes the best soup in Harlem," Bumpy agreed. He knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "Emily, we need to talk. I need to take you home." Fear flashed across her face. To the bad place?" "No," Bumpy said firmly. "Never there. I'm going to take you to your father, to the police. They are looking for you. Your daddy is very worried." "My daddy is a judge," Emily said, sitting up a little straighter. "I know he is," Bumpy said, "and he misses you very much." Bumpy looked at Mamie. Her eyes were sad. She had bonded with the girl in just a few hours, her maternal heart breaking for the trauma the child had endured. But she nodded. She knew they couldn't keep her. Every hour she stayed here was a danger to everyone. "I have a plan," Bumpy said to Zip, who was waiting in the hallway. "We can't just drop her on a corner. Frank made this a federal case. If we leave her and something happens, or if the police see a black car speeding away, they might shoot first. I have to hand her over personally." "Bumpy, that's suicide," Zip hissed. "You walk into a precinct with the judge's kidnapped daughter, they'll pin it on you before you can say hello. They'll lock you up and throw away the key." "Not if she tells them the truth," Bumpy said, looking back at Emily. "And even if they try, it's a risk I have to take. I have to end this tonight. The city is about to explode." Bumpy turned back to the girl. "Emily, I'm going to take you to the police station. There are going to be a lot of men with guns. They are going to be loud. But I need you to be brave. Can you be brave for me?" Emily looked at him. She saw the strength in his face. She nodded. "I can be brave." "Good girl," Bumpy said. "Let's go." The 28th precinct was a fortress of brick and stone, buzzing with activity even at 3 in the morning. Patrol cars were double parked, officers were running in and out, and the air was thick with the static of radios. The hunt for Judge Harrison's daughter had turned the station into a war room. A black Cadillac rolled slowly down the street. It didn't speed. It didn't try to hide. It pulled right up to the front curb, directly under the harsh glare of the streetlights. The movement caught the attention of the sergeant at the desk. He looked out the window. "What the?" The driver's door opened. Zip stepped out, raising his hands high in the air to show he was unarmed. He walked around to the back door and opened it. Bumpy Johnson stepped out. He was wearing his best suit, immaculate and pressed. He stood tall, bathed in the yellow light. He reached back into the car and extended his hand. A small, pale hand took it. Emily Harrison stepped out onto the pavement. For a second, there was silence. Then, chaos erupted. "It's him! It's Johnson!" someone screamed. "He's got the girl!" Doors flew open. Dozens of officers poured out of the station, weapons drawn. Shotguns racked. Revolvers clicked. The shouting was deafening. "Hands up! Get on the ground! Now! Now! Drop to your knees!" Bumpy didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. He kept one hand firmly holding Emily's, pulling her slightly behind his leg to shield her body with his own. He looked at the wall of guns pointed at his chest. He looked at the faces of men who had wanted to kill him for years, and now thought they had the perfect excuse. "Don't shoot!" Bumpy roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "I have the child!" "Let her go, you monster!" a detective screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Bumpy looked down at Emily. She was trembling, terrified by the shouting men. "It's okay," Bumpy whispered to her. "Tell them." Emily stepped out from behind Bumpy's leg. She looked at the police officers. She looked at the guns. Then she looked up at the big man who had saved her from the dark. "Stop it!" Emily screamed, her high-pitched voice piercing the night air. "Stop it! Don't shoot him!" The officers hesitated. The sight of the victim defending the kidnapper confused them. "He saved me!" Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. "He found me! He saved me from the bad man!" The silence returned, heavier than before. The officers lowered their weapons slightly, exchanging glances. "I am surrendering myself for questioning," Bumpy announced, his voice calm and authoritative. "The girl is safe. She is unharmed. Take her to her father." Captain O'Malley pushed through the line of officers. He looked at Bumpy, his face a mask of confusion and suspicion. "Cuff him," O'Malley barked. "Get the girl inside. Call the judge." 3 officers rushed forward. They grabbed Bumpy, spinning him around and slamming him against the hood of the Cadillac. The cuffs clicked tight around his wrists, biting into the skin. Bumpy didn't resist. He watched as a female officer wrapped a blanket around Emily and led her quickly into the station. Emily looked back over her shoulder. "Bumpy!" she called out. Bumpy offered her a small, reassuring nod before he was shoved toward the station doors. He was in the system now. He was in the belly of the beast. The interrogation room was cold, painted a sickly shade of green. Bumpy sat at the metal table, one hand cuffed to the chair. Captain O'Malley paced back and forth, smoking a cigarette that filled the small room with blue haze. "You're in deep, Johnson," O'Malley said, slamming his hand on the table. "Kidnapping a federal judge's daughter? That's the chair. I don't care what the girl says. We know how this works. You snatched her to squeeze the judge, got cold feet, and tried to play the hero to save your neck." "I didn't take her," Bumpy said calmly. "I found her. I returned her. I did your job for you, Captain." "And who took her then?" O'Malley sneered. "Who are you protecting?" "I'm not protecting anyone," Bumpy said. "But I'm not a snitch. You know that. I handled the problem. The girl is home. That's the end of it." "That's not the end," O'Malley shouted, leaning into Bumpy's face. "The judge is on his way down here. He's going to want blood. And I'm going to give him yours." Bumpy remained silent. He knew the risk he had taken. He knew that Frank Lucas had put him in this chair. If he went down for this, Frank won. But Bumpy had the code, and the code said you took the weight. The door to the interrogation room opened. A uniformed officer stuck his head in. "Captain, Judge Harrison is here. He wants to see you." O'Malley grinned. "Here we go. Say your prayers, Bumpy." O'Malley left the room. Bumpy sat alone in the silence. He thought about Mamie. He hoped she was safe. He thought about the look on Frank's face when he slapped him. It was a good memory to hold on to if he was going to prison. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Bumpy waited for the door to open and for the marshals to drag him away. Finally, the door opened. It wasn't the marshals. It was O'Malley. He looked pale. He looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. He walked over to the table and unlocked the cuff. "Get up," O'Malley muttered. Bumpy rubbed his wrist, looking at the captain. "Am I being transferred?" "You're being released," O'Malley spat, clearly furious. "The judge, he spoke to the girl. She told him everything. She told him about the basement. She told him about the coat. She told him you saved her life." Bumpy stood up, straightening his jacket. "The judge wants a word," O'Malley said, stepping aside. Judge Harrison stood in the hallway. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had been crying. He was holding Emily's hand. The girl was clinging to his leg. When Bumpy stepped out, Harrison looked at him. The tension in the hallway was palpable. This was the man trying to destroy Bumpy's empire. This was the enemy. Harrison let go of his daughter's hand and walked up to Bumpy. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked Bumpy up and down. "My daughter tells me you found her," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "She says she was chained up, and you cut her loose." "She shouldn't have been there," Bumpy said simply. "Children are off limits." Harrison nodded slowly. He took a deep breath. "Mr. Johnson, I know who you are. I know what you are. And I know that tomorrow we will be on opposite sides of the law again. But tonight," Harrison extended his hand, "tonight, you are the man who gave me my life back. I am in your debt." Bumpy looked at the hand. He shook it firmly. "No debt, Judge. Just keep her safe." "I spoke to the captain," Harrison said, lowering his voice. "There will be no charges filed against you regarding this incident. And the police presence in Harlem, it will be scaled back. We will look elsewhere for the kidnappers." "I appreciate that," Bumpy said. Harrison turned back to his daughter. "Come on, Emily. Let's go home." Emily waved a small hand. "Bye, Bumpy." "Goodbye, little one," Bumpy said softly. Bumpy watched them leave. He watched the police officers glare at him as he walked toward the exit. He walked out of the station and into the cool night air. Zip was waiting by the car, leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. When he saw Bumpy, He threw the cigarette down and grinned. "I don't believe it," Zip said, opening the door. "You walked right out." "The rules matter, Zip," Bumpy said, getting into the car. "Sometimes they're the only thing that saves you." As they drove back to Harlem, the streets were quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. The heat had broken. The threat had passed. Bumpy looked out the window. He had gained a powerful ally in Judge Harrison, at least for a while. He had saved the neighborhood. But his mind drifted back to the farmhouse in Yonkers. Frank Lucas. Frank had almost destroyed everything because of his greed and his stupidity. He had broken the code. He had proven that he couldn't be trusted. Bumpy had given him 3 days to hide, but Bumpy knew the truth. Frank was a cracked vessel, and you couldn't fix a crack like that. "Zip," Bumpy said quietly. "Yeah, boss? Keep an eye on Frank when he comes back. Watch him close. You think he's going to try something?" "I think a man who would chain a child to a pipe will do anything," Bumpy said, his eyes hard as flint. "And next time, I won't be using my hand." The car turned onto 116th Street. Harlem was waking up. The jazz clubs were opening their doors. The life was returning. And Bumpy Johnson was home, the king on his throne, watching, waiting, and remembering exactly who the monsters were. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.